On a somewhat mixed day here in the market, screen across the screen, but a lot of different stories driving it.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating when you think about Alphabet and Uber and Snap and some of these big names that are really seeing some big declines in today's session, and yet the overall trade is higher. I mean, even some of our gainers or decliners are names that we don't typically talk about today.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, you do have Alphabet and Amazon and Tesla driving the market lower, but you have Nvidia, Broadcom, Eli Lilly pulling things higher.
You know, I wonder also how much data is a driver for today's trade, right? Tariffs are kind of on the back burner right now, for at least for the next month for Mexico and Canada. So we're back to staring at the data and thinking about what the Fed does. And ISM Services disappointed. Is bad news good news now again?
Right, and then you got that decline in the 10-year as well when it comes to yields, down by about 9 basis points. Even if it's a short squeeze, that clearly also having a little bit of ripple through. Yeah,
and of course, everyone's still focused on all of the things coming out of Washington, and will that have an impact? And the question we've been asking a lot of our guests today is, do you sort of set up a defensive playbook for that? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, there's so much coming out of investors, right? What do? Do they sit still? Do they make some moves? It's really a difficult environment to
And we have to talk about as well this idea of this big drop that we're seeing in yields today. That could be a net positive for stocks, so I'm not sure exactly what people are buying and why they're buying into the Treasury market, and that's necessarily a bad sign for the economy. The closing bells in New York as we wait for that deluge of earnings across the wire. A Dow Jones Industrial Average higher by more than 300 points, with 0.7%. The S&P 500 up 24 points, or 0.4%, and the Nasdaq, guys, going to close out the day higher by 0.2%.
All right, guys, Qualcomm is out. Let's go right to their outlook. See second quarter revenue of 10.3 to 11.2 billion, and that is above the street estimate of 10.35 billion. So we'll look for subsequent reaction in the aftermarket. Second quarter, actually going back, second quarter adjusted EPS, also the outlook, 270 to 290 a share, and Scarlet, that compares with 269 a share.
And in terms of second quarter revenue, Qualcomm sees 10.3 billion to 11.2 billion. Analysts were looking for 10.35 billion. This is very much a company that's become a barometer for demand for smartphones. And it comes at a time when, of course, Apple is trying to reduce its reliance on this company. So we're going to really wait to hear how it's doing with expanding to newer markets like the auto market, as well as PCs.
Yeah, on the bottom line, first quarter adjusted earnings per share coming in above estimates at $3.41. The company sees second quarter adjusted earnings per share coming in above estimates, $2.70 to $2.90. Second quarter revenue coming in above estimates, or actually at the higher part of the estimate. The estimate is for $10.35 billion. This company seeing second quarter revenue from $10.3 billion to $11.2 billion. Shares right now in the after hours bouncing around, but higher by 0.7%.
Also taking a look at the broader market, Skyworks Solutions is out as well, looking for second quarter revenue coming in at 935 to 965 million. That is a solid beat. Taking a look at a succession plan as well, Philip Brace will succeed the current CEO and take that helm. That company also looking at adjusted earnings for the second quarter coming in about $1.20. That winds up beating. They did have excess inventory last quarter in automotive and industrial end markets, so interesting to see the read-through on that.
Yeah, and interesting, too, we should point out, both Skyworks and Qualcomm heavily dependent, of course, on Apple. Both companies getting a pretty sizable chunk of their revenue from that relationship, a relationship that we know has been tested. And just going back to Qualcomm for a second, we talk about this idea of where they fit into the broader chip debate as we wait for earnings out of AMD. And we talk about sort of that broader AI narrative and whether there is a place for Qualcomm in that.
No, that's a really good point, right? They've been trying to diversify out of and get away from some of their older business. And having said that, just taking a look at the stock in the aftermarket, Romaine, Qualcomm is bouncing around. We had seen it a little bit higher. Now it's down about 0.7%. So we'll have to see about, what in terms of growth and where it's coming from is going to be important on the call.
All right. And worth mentioning as well, the comments from the CEO, Cristiano Amon, talking about delivering growth across diversification initiatives. Again, reducing its reliance on the smartphone business and executing their 2029, fiscal year 2029 targets to achieve $22 billion of non-handset revenues. Again, going back to that idea of chips in cars and chips in PCs. When it comes to chips in cars, Romaine, NVIDIA is a competitor.
Well, that's what I'm curious about, too, because we've had him on the program, and he has talked about this automotive strategy. And we should point out we are going to get Ford earnings a little bit later this afternoon. And it raises a lot of questions here about the strength of that business as well. More chip earnings crossing the wire right now, I'm told. ARM.
Yep, ARM Holdings, their third quarter total revenue coming in at about $983 million. That is a pretty solid beat there. The company also taking a look at their fourth quarter revenue guide, coming in a touch higher than estimates. That high end about $1.28 billion. And the operating income, a nice beat for the third quarter, coming in at $442 million. And of course, it's that royalty revenue they want to pay attention to for the third quarter, coming in at $580 million. That is also a beat.
The company is saying in comments to shareholders that AI demand continues to drive strong momentum for the ARM ecosystem. AI growth from the edge to the cloud is creating demand for more energy-efficient compute. New AI hardware, the rise of AI agents, and the emergence of smaller, lighter LLMs are unlocking edge AI use cases in smartphones, PCs, consumer electronics, and more. Shares higher so far this year before today by 40%.
Yeah, it's interesting, too. If you have a Bloomberg terminal, you kind of check out the SPLC function. You can kind of get a better read here on which companies that ARM is dependent on. Obviously, Microsoft, Qualcomm, two of its biggest partners, if you will, here. And, of course, that could have a big factor here on how these stocks perform in tandem tomorrow.
All right, MicroStrategy looks like they're just starting to cross in terms of...
That would be strategy.
All right. But right now it's coming across.
Yeah, I heard it.
All right. All right, strategy. Fourth quarter digital assets, $23.91 billion. The estimate was a little bit below that, $22.54. Fourth quarter revenue, $120.7 million. That's a little light. It was the street estimate was $124.4 million. And fourth quarter number of Bitcoins held, that's what it's all about, 447,470. The estimate was 425,149, so a bit above that.
Why did they change their name to Strategy? That doesn't tell you anything about what.
Also, how do the analysts not get it right?
Hey guys, forward earnings crossing the wire right now. Fourth quarter adjusted EPS looks like a pretty sizable beat, 39 cents a share. The street was looking for 32 cents a share. The company also saying that revenue in the most recent quarter also coming in slightly above estimate at $27.3 billion to $25.85 for the full year 2025. Adjusted EBIT, here's your range, $7 billion to $8.5 billion. The street on average was looking for 8.57, so the top end of that range is below the average of street estimates here. And also, just again looking forward here at those 2025 numbers, free cash flow coming in at about $3.5 to $4.5 billion. That's their estimate for the full year here. It'll be interesting to see if we can get some additional numbers here on what they view in terms of actual production and deliveries going forward and what the mix of that is going to be.
Yeah, well, talking about where the demand is, Ford Blue, which is their internal combustion engine cars, that was up by about 4%. Their Ford Model E revenue, that's going to be their green stuff. It's going to be their EVs, is down about 13%, and it's their commercial trucks that you're looking at for Ford Pro that's up by about 5%.
We should also mention that Ford is going to pay a supplemental dividend of 15 cents a share. They've been doing that at the start of each fiscal year for the last couple of years. So that's something that investors will want to, of course, get as they wait through this restructuring that's taking place, especially for the EV business.
Did you guys see that story the other day on the terminal about Ford's EV strategy, or maybe some of the concerns about what that strategy is going forward?
Yeah, about the F-150 Lightning and the challenges with range there.
Yeah, but remember, I mean, they had this big splashy rollout, the F-150 Lightning, the Mach-E, and a couple other vehicles. And you're looking at revenue in that most recent quarter from that basically EV division, if you will, down 13% here. And that whole article was kind of calling into question why people have not embraced the Ford models, the Ford EV models, I should say, as much as they've had competing models, particularly some of the Teslas.
Yeah, one concern that was raised in that story was that the Cybertruck, which was widely seen as a niche product, recently outsold the F-150 Lightning, which I think to a lot of people is pretty surprising. The company certainly changing its strategy when it comes to EVs. It's pretty wild to see the transformation because just a couple of years ago, the wait to get one of these was so long, they couldn't make enough of them.
All right, guys, you've got Ford down about 6% here in the aftermarket. Qualcomm now up about 2%, and ARM down about 4.8%. So we're seeing some big movement here in the aftermarkets. All right, that's a wrap. Our cross-platform radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We call it the closing bell. We'll see you again. Same time, same place tomorrow.